Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Radio Mythoverse with our part 2, where we interview Airwaves creator Nebel. Say hi, Nebel.
Howdy!
He's also our resident Kermit impersonator.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with me, as always, is my partner and our head writer, Matt Trin.
Hello, guys.
And also in the panel is the inker on Airwaves, Forrester.
Hey, what's up?
Last week we talked with Nebel about what the basic premise behind Airwaves was, as well as what kind of influenced that book. Today, we're going to be talking with what has influenced Nebel as an artist. We're going to be getting into his head.
Horrifying, I know.
And also we'll probably get a little insight into what the process behind the book is, which is also good because we got the inker for the book with us.
Yep.
Alright, so.
That'll be Mr. Forrester.
I'm the tracer.
Yee. Yee.
You know, chasing Amy?
Well. Oh, I remember that.
Your mother was a tracer!
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So to start out, Nebel,
Yo.
what kind of got you started on becoming an artist, and specifically a comic book artist? Like, what was can you remember what the moment was where, like, that spark just got set off in your head?
I'm not really sure it was a spark so much as, like, long tectonic shifts. Like, I've drawn basically since I was 3 and just never stopped. And as for becoming a comic artist, I kind of just grew out of it as an extension of having learned how to do storyboarding when I was in school. So yeah, more recently, my drive to become a comic book artist came a lot from the idea that I like a lot of comics, I read a lot of manga, and I got into Western comics fairly recently, and I started finding that doing comics in a way is kind of a quicker way to be able to do storytelling, but it's also its own medium that's got its own rules, and I just like learning how to do something new. So I kind of came originally from an animation background, and then I sort of segued into doing comics because a lot of the skills that I learned doing storyboarding and character design translated pretty well.
Well, I mean, that's not unheard of. Jeff Smith cut his teeth in animation before he got into comics.
Mm-hmm.
For about the 5 of you who don't know the name Jeff Smith, he's the guy who made Bone.
Yep. That's the guy.
I read that in Disney Adventures. They serialized it when I was a child. I don't know how many other people remember that, but...
Yeah, I do. It was always weird how they just ended it.
Yeah, but didn't he end up moving Bone over to Scholastic?
Yeah.
And they were out of order wildly in Disney Adventure also.
In retrospect, I can kind of see why the aesthetic kind of fit in with it.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
I was always impressed with how he would have Phone Bone tell what happened to him, but he'd draw Phone Bone's gestures as he told the story, rather than using a flashback. I thought that was kind of unique.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, that's an interesting framing device, yeah.
Yeah, and then it also kind of just shows his background in animation because how many panels he could fit into a page where he'd have one of the bones just standing in the same spot, but they were doing different things. It's if you're paying attention, you can notice all these little details shifting very subtly. That's someone who's cut their teeth on animation.
Mm-hmm.
And reaction, I remember when the grandmother. I was never sure if the grandmother raced the cows riding cows or if she ran next to the cows. But it was the characters reacting to her and the cows. The off-screen nature of it was funny.
All right, so you came from a primarily animation background and sort of transitioned into comic books. So, like, as an artist yourself, like, who did you sort of look to as sort of, like, if you could just name drop a name or two, like, who would you say has been the biggest influence on you as an artist?
So, I'm sure we probably mentioned this before on other interviews, but obviously a huge influence on my work is Jonan Vasquez of Invader Zim and Johnny the Homicidal Maniac fame. Well, and I name drop those because those were his works that I was exposed to back in high school, of all things. But yeah, it's the big things that I drew from his work are kind of the big expressions and the geometric composition of his characters. When it comes to my more exaggerated and more cartoony characters, I tend to lean on the more geometric aspects, and I like being able to... I'm not sure how much... I haven't done this a whole lot in Airwaves, but stretching out body parts to sort of exaggerate is something I find really fun. But another big thing... One of my other really big influences is... and this might not be quite as obvious until you start looking at how I compose a lot of shots or how I do a lot of illustrations, is Kazuki Takahashi of Yu-Gi-Oh! Fame. And one of the big things I really draw from him is, like, there's some aspects of the way he does faces that I really like, but the thing that I like the most about what he does is all the stuff he does with poses and gesture and perspective. He does a lot of forced perspective where you're, like, way up close on a finger or on an object a character is carrying, and it kind of distorts the perspective, but it also gives you a really great feeling of depth when it comes to a character. Also, the fact that the guy is forced to draw hands all the time because they're playing a card game is something I feel like I should emulate more.
That was a joke about how so many artists can't draw hands, wasn't it?
A little bit, yeah. Including me.
My exposure with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is mainly through the anime. I mean, I think I might have read a couple manga volumes, but from what I do remember, yeah, I know what you're talking about, like how there were all these, like, really dynamic angles that were kind of made to just dress up what is essentially an anime or manga about a children's card game, just trying to make it look exciting.
Yeah. And, I really love the way he did that kind of stuff, the way he would mess with perspective and camera angles and composition to really drive home whatever story point he's trying to make. Or trying to make something seem really dramatic and important, and it's like, if you're just going back to the root of it, is like, these are kids just playing board games.
Yeah.
But it's like he makes it look really cool and really exciting, and that's something I really like drawing from him.
I mean, for one, that's like that's kind of something I do appreciate about a lot of manga artists. Like the guy who does I forget what it's called in Japanese, but it translates roughly to Food Wars.
No, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a show. It's basically the manga version of Iron Chef, and he manages to make it look really exciting.
Another thing that I guess, like, Death Note is another one of those things that's in that vein of making really mundane things look important and dramatic.
Yeah.
I will take this chip and I will eat it.
It looked a lot. It looked a lot more over the top in the anime than it did in the manga.
It is, but like, I still love the way they do it in the anime.
Oh yeah.
because, like, that's kind of part of what you came here for. It's like, yeah, eat that potato chip. Play that tennis.
And, yeah, like, Invader Zim, like, I remember back when that show premiered, like, I think I caught, like, the premiere of the pilot, and I think, like, what was it? Does anyone remember the year it premiered? I think it was
Zim?
I think it was 2000. Matt, do we have that on hand?
I think it might be 2000. Maybe 2002 at the latest.
You're gonna have to be the Jamie on the podcast here.
Hey, look.
Google says March 30th, 2001.
All right.
Yeah, 2001 to 2006.
Yeah.
Alright, I'll trust Google this time.
Okay, yeah.
Google.
But yeah, I definitely remember seeing that when it went on. I remember that. And the thing that just immediately stuck out to me about Zim was this did not look like anything I had seen before. Granted, you could say that about pretty much every other show Nickelodeon was airing at that time. But that was something that I really came to appreciate about it as I got older, was that when I went back and rewatched Zim a while ago, like, I really realized nobody but Jonan Vasquez could make this.
Nobody but Jonan Vasquez would make it at the time. I mean, I suppose, frick, I'm blanking on his name. The feller behind Ren and Stimpy. I always blank on its name because it's really
K.
John K. I always blank on it because his name is, like, weirdly mundane. It's like, he might make something close to it, but not quite that.
And I even caught, like, an interview Vasquez did on Nickelodeon's YouTube channel where he talked about, like, how he was always drawn to art with that kind of personality. Like, this couldn't be made by anybody else, and that's kind of what he wanted to do with Zim. Like, he wanted to do something that was like completely him. Even though it being a network show, it was a collaborative effort. But it's like there's just so much of his fingerprints on it. You can't really separate him from it.
No, yeah, and it kind of shows, like, it needed to be Vasquez at that particular time, because even Florpus that came out a little bit ago, it's like, I'm sure a lot of people have commentated on it. Florpus is still good, but it feels like aesthetically it's sort of lost a little bit of that, pardon the literal and figurative edge that Zim had before.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can definitely see the difference between it and the show, well, at least from an aesthetic perspective. It's like night and day.
Yeah, it's almost literally night and day.
Yeah, the characters are recognizably themselves, but they're rendered differently. Like, it's a lot there's a
lot rounder,
lot softer and softer.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to describe it. Sort of softer. It's a lot of the edges are a bit more rounded, and the colors, and there's less contrast in the colors and the values. Like the original cartoon had such stark black and white and really light and really dark tones that there would be times that Zim's gloves would almost blend into the background because everything is so dark.
I wonder if that's just kind of a result of, like, some artists, like, as they go on, like, their style becomes more and more refined, and they lose kind of the edge and personality they had early on, or if it's just something that kind of got carried on from the comics, because it does seem to resemble the comics a lot more than it does the show.
Yeah, it there's parts of it that do, and they probably drew a bit from that.
In fact, I think the whole plot line is ripped off one of the arcs from the comics too.
Oh, that wouldn't really surprise me all that much.
I actually kind of did a deep dive into the Zim comics. That's because I got really curious, mostly from this one guy who was doing dramatic readings of them, and then I came across a 4-part called Enter the Zim Void, where Dim and Zib end up in some sort of dimensional nexus that is filled with Zims from other realities.
Oh,
And they've all built like this whole society of Zims.
oh.
You know what
I
I'm
can only,
talking about?
Yeah, I can only hope it's better than like a council of Ricks.
It's Zim.
Okay, so it is better.
It's like that. The way it's all organized is that it's got this number cast system where all the Zims are assigned a number based on when they showed up.
So the first Zim is on top.
Exactly, and the first 100 after him are like his inner circle. And our Zim is trying to work his way up in that Zim society while Dib is organizing a resistance with other Zims.
So he lives in a Zim society, and there is a resistance, is what you're telling me.
Yes.
Amazing.
And oh my god, there is a plot twist once they meet up with Zim number 1. I know you.
Oh.
I can tell you have not read this, so I don't want to spoil it for you. But it is. By the time you're through that whole arc, you're gonna wonder why that wasn't the movie instead of Enter the Florpus.
Yeah. No, that sounds like it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's like, well, you brought up like the sort of conflict with the artist trying to refine their style, and in so doing, sort of losing their edge and losing their identity. I feel like it is something I kind of struggle with a little bit, because like, I'm going to talk about a couple more of my influences to kind of illustrate that point. Well, I did a little bit of looking up, because one of the other things that sort of influenced my aesthetic is Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and I had this weird brain blast moment after I looked up who was responsible for the aesthetic. I found out that it's Mike Mignola.
Ah.
And guess who else Mike Mignola was a big influence on?
Do tell.
Kazuki Takahashi.
Go figure.
So I did end up reading Hellboy, because I did find out that Mignola kind of influenced a bunch of other people, so I ended up reading Hellboy just to kind of get a feel for what he was like, or for what the comics were like, and get a feel for his aesthetic. And it's pretty neat. I also watched the Screw-On Head pilot, if you ever saw that. You guys ever see the Amazing Screw-On Head pilot?
That doesn't ring a bell.
No,
Okay.
I don't believe so.
I think it was like pitched for the Sci-Fi Channel. It's basically a Mike Mignola cartoon about this it's this head that has a screw at the bottom of it, and he screws himself onto different utility bodies and hunts monsters and stuff. It's cool. They had David Hyde Pierce as the main bad guy, Emperor Zombie. So you had Niles Crane as an Emperor of the Undead. It's pretty freaking cool.
Yikes.
I mainly know him as Cecil Terwilliger, Sideshow Bob's brother.
Who was cast for that because Sideshow Bob is played by Kelsey Grammer.
Yes, and in Cecil's episode, they even do a whole.
They do a whole Frasier bit.
Yes.
I love that. But yeah, Mike Mignola is another big influence, and it also harkens back to the sort of geometric stuff I try to do. Mm-hmm. And I also really like the dramatic, deep shadows that he does. Although I try not to do that all the time. Mm-hmm. That's Mignola's thing. I can't claim to own it.
Okay.
I mostly do it when I find it useful.
Yeah.
The best way of doing it.
Okay.
So yeah, and obviously I have my last big manga influence, and it's kind of the manga that got me into fantasy adventure stories is Hiro Mashima.
He does Fairy Tail.
He did Fairy Tail, yeah, but my first exposure to him was when I was in middle school, and one of my friends got me to start reading Rave Master, which was not nearly as big, but like it was a really neat, cheesy, over-the-top fantasy adventure story. And, you know, I love the heck out of that, and I love Mashima's aesthetic. And, you know, and that's all to say that, like, I feel like I'm constantly pulled by the artist's dilemma of, like, I never feel like my art is good because it doesn't look like the people I emulate, but at the same time, I'm like, I need to be me, and I need to do my own work, so it's like, you know, that kind of push and pull of, like, it doesn't look exactly like the stuff I like, and then, well, of course it isn't, you aren't them.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't really speak to that dilemma, because, I mean, that's personally not something I deal with. I mean, like, but I do understand what it's sort of like when you're pulling from influences, like and you're trying to emulate them, you almost feel like you're kind of stuck in their shadow perpetually.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily that you dislike being in their shadow, it's more like you want to be more like them because you like their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if your goal is trying to be like other artists, that's never gonna happen because you're not going to be.
I kind of feel like this was a major dilemma for someone like John Romita Jr.
I guess if you're filling in your dad's shoes, yeah.
And your dad is John Romita, who aside from Steve Ditko is probably the biggest name attached to Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like you really have to admire that the guy managed to find his own voice as an artist.
Oh yeah.
I think it was in like an interview he gave on the Daredevil DVD where he talked about like he just eventually said like maybe it wasn't Daredevil, it might have been the Spider-Man DVD. I think it was Spider-Man. Where he just said like it basically amounted to that somewhere along the line he realized he was never gonna be like his dad, and it was better for him to just be his own artist.
Yeah, Spider-Man DVD. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it wasn't. But yeah, it's because it's like, I mean, for one, everyone already knew his dad. What's the point in trying to imitate him?
Yeah. You're not gonna be him, so don't. It sounds simple, but for an artist, it's kind of tough to do because it's like you kind of, when you're done with your work, you want to look at it and say, do like God does at the end of every day of creation, go, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're measuring it up against something else and you're like, oh, it's not quite like this, you have to kind of make that judgment call a lot.
Mm-hmm. So I guess this is a good way to segue into the whole process of working on Airwaves. I mean, like, yeah, it's still kind of a work in progress at this point. But I mean, like, you said, like, you kind of brought a lot of the skills and disciplines you learned from animation over into this. So, like, when you're plotting out a page, like, what's like, are you thinking more visually, or are you thinking more visually? Because like with me, it's because I mainly do writing. I have to plot out everything in my head and put it in a Word document. So like, are you kind of like starting out with the visuals already?
It usually depends on the scene. Like a more action-oriented scene, something that involves a lot more stuff happening, or like a shot that I want to do that's just really cool, I'll have those ideas in my head already, and I, at all times, for Airwaves at least, I am fortunate in that I have a pretty good idea of how I want it to play out in the terms of plot. It's more like getting to those points. In something that's more dialogue heavy, and Brett, you've seen this in the Discord channel, that the way I do it first is, if it's more dialogue heavy, I try to plot out the panels to figure out how I want the beats to go for the dialogue and write it in first. Because it's like, okay, I need to figure out what the dialogue is first, because after that I need to figure out like how I want the characters to be posed and how I want them to be expressing, because the gesture and the expressions and even like the camera angles are really important, but they end up being derivative of the dialogue in the really dialogue heavy scenes.
Like, as far as posing and everything goes, do you like have to work with references, or are you one of those people who can just do it all from whole cloth out of your head?
I'm one of those people that keeps trying to do it whole cloth out of my head, and when I really start bashing my head against the wall, I finally give up and use references. But yeah, I try to make a habit of using references more often, but I also want to get to plotting stuff out and roughing stuff out more quickly. Mm-hmm. And something that I'm also trying to get better with is getting feedback from my work, like getting people to look over it and give me a once-over of like, okay, how's this reading? How's it doing? Does it make sense? Is there something that's not really communicated clearly? Mm-hmm. Is there a better way they can do this? And so far I'm finding out that, true to the cliche, I'm my harshest critic.
Yeah. Now, considering that Forrester's doing the inking game, like, did you always kind of intend on having people help you out with the process, or did you kind of initially want to see if you could do it all by yourself?
You'll notice a little bit of a pattern. I wanted to see if I could do all by myself first. And the way I found out that I didn't want to do that was doing Maze of Dolls and Jungle of Ghosts all on my own. By the time I got through with it, I realized, oh my god, if I'm going to be doing a whole comic like this is going to take forever. It took like the better part of a year to do Maze of Dolls, and it took a better part of a year to do Maze of Dolls and Jungle of Ghosts. So I realized that like I need to like bite my tongue and swallow my pride and let other people do some of the work for me. Because it's going to take so long if I do this by myself. And I did have the pencils roughed out at first, and all the pencils for like a rough draft are done by this point. But now I'm looking at them and going, yeesh, I don't think I did my best with this. So now I'm going back and editing a lot of the pages again and trying to make them punchier, make them grab more attention. Like we talked about with the first two pages, where I'm like, the original opening was a little too slow and it's too easy to put the book down. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going over each of the pages with that same kind of scrutiny and trying to figure out, okay, how much of this can stay? How much of this do I want to change? And hopefully giving it more like critical feedback so I don't end up George Lucasing myself.
So Forrester, having taken over inking duties, like, what about Nebel's work kind of has stuck out to you?
I liked how streamlined it was, and I know he just got through talking about influences, but what drew me to it was that I couldn't really tell offhand like what his influences were. It was very unique, and modern, I guess, contemporary. It doesn't feel like
oh god.
Like, I don't, like, people look at my art and they know exactly what I'm going for, that kind of 40s to 70s. Sometimes I get a little tired of the word retro. with his, it didn't quite look like anything else. I don't mean that in a bad way. That's a good thing. That's the originality of it is what drew me in. And as we talked about on the podcast for Hallowed Harvest, the ambush art quality, like in Maze of Dolls, where you've got this like really horrifying story, but it's in this disarmingly cute style. And also, I've got a really steady inking hand, so I thought that my ability to draw like really smooth lines in one go could be helpful.
Yeah, definitely, especially because like my art is just chronically rough, and it takes a lot of time for me to clean it up, especially when I'm inking. So it's kind of hard for me to really embrace the rough, sketchy aesthetic.
Yeah,
That just naturally comes out of me.
I learned with calligraphy pens and brushes, so even though I'm all digital now, I kind of put in a lot of work at that, because at one time I really wanted to do calligraphy because my father did, and he used to do like award things and diplomas and stuff, but there's just not a market for it now. Like, he was doing that in the 70s, and people still paid for it then. Now that doesn't really exist, so like he taught it to me, and I do long practice. This would be around 2002 or so, but it just finally got to where it wasn't feasible, so I had a skill I couldn't use much, so inking lets me use that in a different way.
Yeah, those skills are translated even into the digital era.
Right.
Because it's still the same kind of practice of a steady and precise hand.
Used to be a lot more expensive to learn it when you were working with physical paper and physical ink, and
yeah, I'd imagine that ink would run you up pretty quick.
Yeah.
I remember buying some for some art classes when they had you try out using a stylus before, and it was like, oh wow, this is a little pricey.
I always liked Speedball brand because I found it to be like the only one that you could get at Office Max that didn't, or at Michael's, that didn't get destroyed by the eraser.
You see, I have the unfathomable privilege of having grown up in Southern California, so I had like art supply warehouse and place to go to.
I had a frame store in Norfolk, Virginia that reeked of cigarette smoke and had terrible Google reviews, and they ordered me ink, but they ordered the wrong ink and then got really mad at me when I showed up and it was the wrong thing. And Navy towns are not exactly art places. But
no, I don't imagine they are.
The upside to that is I kind of had the market cornered, and I sort of made that my writing shtick to find stories from it. So it worked out for me, but finding art supplies was terrible.
Yeah. I come from unfathomable privilege. I'm just grateful that I found a blick in driving distance.
Yeah. So the cartoony art styles really drew you into this, and yeah, I mean, I'll admit, Mike, even though it's kind of not apparent, like, I do think Nebel sort of has that sort of Jonan Vasquez spirit where it doesn't look like anything else, like it doesn't look like anything anyone else could make, which is that's art that I'm always kind of attracted to.
And he resisted anime influence, but yet because of the cartoonish style, it has the expressiveness of anime. But it's that odd style, like, say, it doesn't look like Scott Pilgrim, but I mean, Scott Pilgrim has that vibe where they do anime-like things with it without like an Asian.
Yeah, I think Brian Lee O'Malley might have name dropped Tezuka as an influence. If he did, that would not surprise me.
True, but Tezuka is so old now, most people wouldn't really recognize his work as anime style.
Yeah, I think Tezuka is at the point where he's kind of right at the inflection point where the Japanese comic aesthetic and Disney just sort of crash into each other, and that's where he comes from, and then everything down the line is sort of it's kind of a game of artistic telephone where there's modifications all the way down.
Yeah.
But I think his is the point where the Disney and Western comic aesthetic combined with the Japanese aesthetic is its most apparent.
Oh, definitely.
You're also doing the opposite of the usual fusion, because like I was looking at Action Comics the other day, and I've noticed the modern like house style for like DC is manga styled borders and pages where you have a lot of full bleeds, a lot of splash pages, and like jagged triangular boxes that they use for like emphasis. They use the action style of manga, but they use the very Western Jim Lee art style. You're doing kind of the opposite. You're doing the cartoony aesthetic with the like expressiveness of manga, but with square boxes, very classic Western, which I think is a really good style, and I think people shouldn't in the West abandon the grid box entirely, because I mean, like, you think about the television, we're always looking at, when we watch a movie, we're looking at a square box. Box compositions are not bad, but they've almost become taboo in like Western like action type comics.
I'll tip my hand a little bit and say that it's not necessarily intentional. It's mostly the storyboard discipline coming through.
That's what I was about to say, because I have a feeling that was something that carried over from your time on studying animation.
And I'm not opposed to doing like, I'll do a splash page once in a while if it's like something I think is really important.
Yeah.
But I do kind of I always think of the panels like storyboards, or I kind of think of them like shots. And I also kind of think of them in terms of time. Which, like animation timing, where I will have just blank panels that sort of serve to keep up a rhythm and kind of be a beat to kind of carry on a joke or carry on a moment or carry on tension. I remember hearing something, I don't know if this is like the exact science of it insofar as there are such things for comic art. Well, I remember hearing something about like the 9-panel grid being the most cinematic because it's the point where you scrutinize the most of a movement. And I remember getting really annoyed at how 9-panel grids have gotten abused recently.
Would one of the chief offenders happen to have a name that rhymes with... It's with, Bing?
Oh my god!
That's not even art, that's the copy and paste button.
Okay, so whenever somebody wants to do like a 9-panel grid and wants to really stretch out a moment in time, which is also a film technique, and it's a really good film technique. But the thing about a 9-panel grid is that it's kind of a waste when all 9 panels are the same guy slightly shifting in their seat. The way it was done in Heroes in Crisis, it did not build up tension. It basically got me to care about what was going on precisely once, and I can't remember when that was. Well, yeah, I don't know. That's my rant. The Heroes in Crisis, I can't stand it. I can't stand the way it used 9-panel grids because
not everyone can be Frank Miller.
No, not everybody can be, or Alan Moore.
Or to bring it back, Jeff Smith.
Nope, not everybody can be. But it couldn't hurt to learn something from him.
And because like I said earlier, there's like, I can't think of any because there are like so many examples in Bone where he does that same 9-panel grid layout, but he does it so much better. And that's because, well, for one, the characters don't just slightly shift or anything. Like, you can actually see changes from panel to panel, whether they're overt or subtle details.
Yeah.
And
the changes are worth noting.
He minds how the characters are moving, too. Like, I actually got called out by Scott McLeod for that. He had come to Tidewater Community College for a presentation in 2012. and I waited around afterwards to talk to him. And he was really nice, really friendly, and I was showing him artwork that actually depicted the building we were in a 1940s setting, and he got excited about that, and he signed on the back of it and drew a Kilroy face. But I was showing him some of my really polished new art, and he was looking at some that was from like 2010 and that I had redrawn. And he was like, oh, wow, no, this here is really good. You should still use this. And I'm like, well, it's not as good, because I'm thinking in terms of like surface detail. And he was pointing out how, like in the older version, I had the characters like emoting with their hands and stuff, whereas I was focusing so much on backgrounds in the other that hands were cut off. And that stuck with me forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really glad I got that review from him. Jeff Smith does the same thing. Like when Phone Bone is telling Thorne like the backstory, how they got run out of Boneville and all that.
Yeah,
And like I said, there's no flashbacks.
he just gestures.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, big gestures.
And it
Big
feels like
silhouette,
movement
big
even though it's
poses.
still.
What were you saying, Forrester?
I'm sorry, I just said it feels like movement even though it's still.
Well, it's because
Yeah.
I think it's because as your eye is traveling from panel to panel, your brain kind of fills in the blanks for you, and it sort of ends
Yeah.
up sort of creating this very basic illusion of movement.
Mm-hmm. The illusion of life, as Frank and Ollie would call it, and that is very much something that comes from the animation discipline.
Because animation is doing the same thing, just at a faster speed. They're all
Faster
still,
speed and with more pictures.
Yep, but it's still just still drawings, making your brain fill it in.
Mm-hmm. And
I always wondered if aliens would look at our TV screens and see the same optical illusion, or if their eyes and brains would be evolved differently. That's a weird aside, sorry, but I've always wondered that.
I guess it would depend on whether they're able to like catch that, for lack of a better way to describe it, like the shutter speed. Because the way that we do it to prevent strobing is that the image would come on and then off, and then on and then off, and then on and then off. It's why that if you try to record it with a phone, your TV will look like it's blinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what it's actually doing. It is blinking, it's just blinking so quickly that we can't notice it. Maybe the Alamouse will see the blinks, or maybe they'll be adapted to a point that the trick doesn't work on them, and it just strobes together, and it just looks like a mess. They won't be able to see it. I don't know. Guess we'll have to ask them when they get done with their press conference.
Yeah, that's what I always wondered, like on Star Trek, was
It was like just
how
just
convenient
like
it was that every alien species could like use the same view screens and monitors when like it's either dogs or cats. One of the two of them can't watch a video on a TV screen.
just seeing Forrester like plow through a crowd of reporters. There's like, "Excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, I have a question. Can you watch a television?"
Well, anyways, let's get back to Airwaves. I didn't mean to derail.
No, this is about what we expected. This is what we want.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Obviously.
Alright, so yeah.
But yeah,
Let's talk
Trace
about
back
Brittany
to
herself, because that's the other thing that made me fascinated with it, was the character. You've got a very original lead here.
yeah, I definitely found myself liking Brittany a lot, and I think a really good sign with her, little bit of a, I'm sure I probably already said this in the last podcast, but one thing that I actually kind of treated as a really good sign with Brittany is that I could put her in a different story and it still worked. Like, Maze of Dolls was not a story I had in mind when I was conceiving of Airwaves.
Mm-hmm.
It was just something I kind of thought, I was like, hey, I can put Brittany into this situation and see what happens, and it works. So it's like, okay, this character is actually pretty versatile. You can put her in a lot of different places. Because not every character is like that. Not every character has to be, but it's kind of a... I think it's, again, another animation discipline thing, because, like, the earliest animated characters, they sort of just put them in whatever situation they could think of for the moment. Like, I want Mickey Mouse like driving a steamboat and getting into a fight, or I want Mickey Mouse trying to pilot a plane, and you can have him do all these different things. Or you could have any like animated character do a whole bunch of different things, and I think with Brittany, like Maze the Dolls kind of gave me an assurance that Brittany was a character that was strong enough that you could put her in multiple positions or multiple situations.
So what were your inspirations for, like,
for Airwaves itself?
Or for Brittany the character, like...
Brittany is, I mean, as I can talk about aesthetically, but like the character is mostly me trying to come up with what would a sunny conspiracy theorist look like.
Yeah, that got brought up in the last one, so...
Yeah. Like a kind of optimistic, positive, sunny, bubbly conspiracy theorist. What would that look like? And Brittany kind of came out of that.
Yeah, that's not a typical combination. That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah. We talked about it a little bit, that like usually the kind of conspiracy theorists you're used to are kind of like, well, they're unhinged in one way or another, and they're kind of dour, and they're kind of doomers, and, you know, that kind of personality trait gets kind of played over and over again, and I'm like, okay, I mean, there's a good reason they would be like this, but I wonder how you would make a character that had a very different personality. And with Brittany, it kind of came down to, like, she treats it all kind of like a puzzle. It's all kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And she treats, like, unraveling conspiracy theories like solving a puzzle or finishing a Rubik's Cube or, like, playing a game. It's just fun. And then it stops being interesting when she understands it.
That is interesting. I sort of thought of her as like a modernization of Carl Kolchak, but that's my interpretation.
I guess I don't know a whole lot about Kolchak, but I guess I need that elaborated on a bit.
That's me as being, I guess, the vintage guy. It was a one-season 70s show that spun off from a pair of TV movies, and it was this reporter. He always wore this, like, seersucker suit, and he was kind of a lighthearted character, but he was a real bulldog for getting the news story, because he's like your classic, like, 1940s newspaper man.
Yeah, I think I know that show. Like, it's sort of like a precursor to shows like the X-Files, isn't it?
Oh, it literally is. Chris Carter wanted to make it canon, but MGM and Fox were rival companies, and they said no. So instead what he did was he cast Kolchak's actor to play an FBI agent who had started the X-Files back in the 70s, and Mulder refers to him as the father of the X-Files.
I remember Kolchak because the Sci-Fi Channel, back when it had good programming, had on all the time.
But yeah.
Brittany is just my interpretation, but I like the motivation there that she thinks of it as like solving a puzzle, and then it's not fun anymore. It's like, you know, the kid with the toy. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Yeah, I had this image with Brittany that I always had in my head, but I never committed to drawing it. It's more something that, and I'm not really sure if I want to commit it to canon, but I think it's an interesting image of Brittany finishing a Rubik's Cube and then throwing it against the wall to pick the pieces up and put it back together again.
Nice.
Oh, that's the interesting one.
It's like, there's a part of me that wants to do it because it says a lot about what she's like and who she is, but I also think it might suggest that she's a lot more unhinged than I intended her to be.
Maybe she could have been a child when it happened.
That's true. That can be like a little 4-coma gag comic for me to do. Just little Brittany, like, playing with a Rubik's Cube, throws it against the wall and puts it back together.
Mythoverse. We've got to get her in Mythoverse.
That, you know what? That can be the Christmas Mythoverse. She gets a
I do have this idea of, like, kind of her reenacting that one scene from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, which one?
The one where Charlie's trying to tell Mac about the mail.
Oh, I did do a drawing of Brittany in front of a similar, like,
Yeah, you did one that was
corkboard.
that was like Pepe Sylvia, but and like this is some deep community lore. So Nebel used to work at the post office, and there was something very peculiar he noticed while working there.
Yeah. So, I don't know if I want to tell this story yet. I think I'll wait until it comes up in the book.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
Well, let's talk about where
wait.
the reader. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll just. Yeah, we'll. Yeah. Okay, if he doesn't want to talk about it, okay, that's fine. But yeah,
Yeah,
we'll-
not
The
yet.
audience in
Not
suspense.
yet.
Yeah.
I want to hold you in suspense a little bit.
the,
I want to make you work for it.
yeah,
Okay, Nebel, let's talk about where the audience is right now. Maze of Dolls, of course, is out. So the Mythoverse readers have already met Brittany. Where will Airwaves find the character relative to where they last saw her?
In a completely different place. Well, for what, like, literally and figuratively.
yeah.
Is
Well, they're
this
gonna
before
find-
or after Maze of Dolls?
Afterwards. This is a couple years after.
So it's loosely real time almost.
Loosely. Very loosely. But yeah, she is a couple years out. She's moved to a different place under circumstances that are not explicitly stated. She's in a new community, but she is already kind of made a name for herself. Not necessarily in a good way. There's some of her tendencies I might have talked about in the last show.
She's basically gained a reputation for being the Snoopy one who's. She's gone through
Crazy.
She's gone through people's garbage. She always seems to know things that she should not know. Nah. It's gotten her in trouble. It's gotten her in trouble with the law, but nothing really all that serious.
Done a lot of community service, and may have done a little bit of drunk tank time, but nothing much worse than that.
Yeah, nothing above a violation.
Yeah. But she seriously creeps people out.
Yeah, but she's harmless. She's harmless.
Yep.
And now she's about to find herself getting mixed up in a bizarre misadventure that features assassins, occult secret societies, and monsters.
Yep.
And all because
She's about to dig too deep.
And all because she was snooping around a number station.
Which is something she has a special affinity for. Because number stations are one of those like puzzles that are, except for very rare circumstances, uncrackable. Because the way they work, and I think I might have gone over this last time. I don't remember. I'll just do it again anyway. So, the way number stations work is that they broadcast over shortwave. They have kind of a, I'm not sure if call sign is the correct term for it, but they have this sort of signifier that's usually like a song that's played on loop. And then they do a broadcast that's usually a series of numbers that's part of a relatively simple cipher, but it's a cipher that's generated one time and is single use only. Sorry for that. And the operative receiving the message will use that cipher for a single time to decipher that single message and then destroy the pad that they use for it. It's called a one-time pad. I think I might have mentioned this before because one of the pads that has been used, I think by the CIA, was printed on bubblegum, and they were instructed to chew on it when they were finished.
That's genius.
But yeah, nobody but the person receiving the transmission who has the one-time pad will ever know what the message says.
I don't know.
And that's...
I don't
What's
know.
that?
I don't know why, but this kind of reminds me of that whole bit in Mission Impossible where the message self-destructs after the guy gets it.
Yeah, it's that same kind of thing. Only it's hidden in plain sight. Everybody can hear it, but only one person can understand it.
The bubblegum is fascinating because it's analog, so it's not vulnerable to some method like, say, Vanek freaking, because it's never on a screen or anything that could be intercepted through radio waves.
Mm-hmm. It's just you just printed it on gum. And I think Brittany would find that really fascinating. And she's I think she's also pretty fascinated by the analog aspect of it because she's basically cracked everything digital.
So if she finds chewing gum under a seat or on the ground, is she going to look at it to see if any of the message is still there?
She very well might, yes.
And she
probably has.
Hold on, if she's cracked everything digital, is this an implicit admission that she may or may not have cracked at the security grid at say, the Pentagon?
And quickly got bored with it. She
So
may or may
she
not.
was a computer hacker before this?
We don't know.
I think
That's a lot of what's going to go on here, is that there's a lot of questions about what Brittany's background was. Because Maze of Dolls only gives like a little snapshot of it. It's very brief and very contained, and the most it tells you is that she has a friend and quite a bit of free time.
is this going
In an earlier version, Irene was going to also be a hacker. I took that out for two reasons. One, I thought it was a bit OP and giving her too much to do, and also computers and transgender people are kind of a stereotype, and I didn't want to, I'm not like the easily offended type, but I consider stereotypes lazy and try to avoid them.
Yeah, it's more boring than anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But having
If there's a
Brittany,
demographic that's associated with one thing, I'll just back out and try to do something more creative.
yeah, Brittany, I think having her have this understanding of digital media, it kind of works in Airwaves because it doesn't help her a whole lot against what she's up against because they're analog. It can only take her digital expertise can only take her so far, wherever that expertise may have come from.
Now, I don't remember the last podcast. Have you discussed the supporting cast in this yet, or not?
I don't think I have in very much detail.
I think I might have held off on asking questions about the supporting cast, mostly because I didn't want to give away too much if there were any potential spoilers.
I think we can talk about Lucy a little bit.
Alright, yeah. Okay, so, we basically know Lucy's function in the story is basically to be the straight man to all of Brittany's zaniness. That's because when you have a main character that bizarre, you kind of need someone to have what I call the normal person reaction to them.
You need somebody who's more grounded to be around them.
Someone that some of the audience can experience that world through.
Yeah, and if you've seen, you guys have probably already seen the first 2 pages that were released on Patreon as previews. Mm-hmm. The girl that's running with Brittany with the pistol, that's Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucy is she's been a lifelong resident of Grand Lake, which is the town that Brittany now lives in. Mm-hmm. And she is basically the person that understands that Brittany isn't really a threat. But she's also still somebody who's sort of creeped out by what she does and has kind of taken it upon herself to be Brittany's personal babysitter. Because she can get into a lot of trouble and she can really give people the wrong idea about what she's up to. So having someone who can rein her in is kind of crucial for Brittany to function in a community in any capacity.
So she really can't be left alone.
No. She sometimes will be, but Lucy has come to the conclusion that she really can't leave her alone.
Okay, is it to the point where they're roommates?
They are not.
Okay, so she's not keeping that close of an eye on her.
No, but Grand Lake is a pretty small town, so they're neighbors, or at least they're in the same neighborhood. So they're not too far away from each other.
It's one of those places where, like, everybody knows each other.
Yeah. And you can pretty readily tell when it's somebody that lives there, or if it's a tourist on vacation, and if you're working in a restaurant, you probably already know all the truckers.
How much business has Brittany's antics cost her job?
It costs her a lot of tips, because Brittany and Lucy both work at a restaurant. And Brittany has this idea that's halfway right, where she believes that the way to really get customers to come back is to give them the impression that you care about them. And how do you let them know that you care about them? Well, you pay attention to them. And you can demonstrate that you pay attention to them by engaging them in conversations about stuff that they're interested in or stuff that they know. Mm-hmm. The trouble is that she goes in way too far and basically drops like deep dark secrets about them and tries to carry casual conversations with them about it, and it comes off more threatening than endearing. Not necessarily threatening because she gives off that energy, but threatening because, like, you should not know this. How do you know this?
So it's just it's just really invasive and stuff.
Yeah, it's very invasive and it's really disturbing. But she thinks she's being friendly, and she thinks she's showing that she actually cares about other people because she's paying attention to them. She's just paying too close attention.
Like I said in the last in the last podcast, that under any other writer, the type of character that Brittany would likely be an antagonist, just because you would not think that anyone who was being that invasive into your personal information has good intentions, and rightly so.
Yeah, you would be right to be suspicious of such a person. Brittany is somebody who who doesn't have much of an understanding of what she's doing. And I suppose those of you who read Maze of Dolls may be able to string something together between that and Brittany wanting to keep a really close eye on everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like with Brittany, she does. What she's doing is kind of. There's a lot. She's crossing lines, yes, but
several of them.
She doesn't mean any harm.
No, she doesn't.
Not that anyone really has any way of knowing that, though.
Exactly.
And Lucy's about the only person who really understands that she doesn't mean any harm, and she's constantly having to apologize to people for her, essentially, is what I'm getting.
Yeah, she ends up having to clean up her messes and trying to get people to understand, look, there isn't really anything to it. She's not malicious, she's just weird.
And I can imagine that having to do that over and over again, that wears on her. And I'm kind of wondering, just like, how was Lucy able to be the first one who sort of managed to get past that aspect of Brittany's personality? Because that's
a big hurdle to get over. Yeah,
because like I said, like anyone else, if anyone is going to be that invasive with your privacy, you're going to be suspicious of them, and as we established, you would be right to feel that way, because you have no way of knowing if they mean you any harm.
Yeah. The short version is, because I don't want to give away too much, because it's going to be a story beat later, Somebody tipped her off. That's about as much as you're getting for now.
I think that's
Somebody tipped Lucy off about what Brittany was like.
In a good way or bad way? Is that how she knows she's not a threat, or?
To know that they tipped her off to let her know that she's not really threatening, because the assumption would be that she's threatening. But yeah, somebody told her ahead of time. And it's somebody who also is privy to pretty intimate knowledge about her.
Can we discuss how this ties in with the rest of the Mythoverse, or is that getting too spoilery?
That would be a little bit too spoilery, but I'll assure you that it does connect.
Look, if you see the Mythoverse logo go on the cover, it's canon.
Right.
It does take place in the same universe, but there is another connection, and that will become evident later.
And for the record, I kind of like that it's like I kind of like that it exists in its own corner of the Mythoverse. And it's like it's not trying to tie in with anything else that's already been put down. I mean, yeah, we're still pretty new and everything, but I mean, I'm pretty sure I've said this somewhere already. The problem I've come to have with stuff like Marvel and DC is that the universes are huge and yet feel very small at the same time, because all the characters are 1 or 2 degrees removed from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like
they'll be right up on each other.
Even the same city. Like, I like how, in the Mythoverse, we everything's spread out. Both Washingtons are used as a setting, and yours and mine.
yeah.
Like, that's how it's thousands of miles, and like Port of Call was set 80 years before everything else in Hallowed Harvest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a prequel. It was this completely separate event in the same universe 80 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, like 2/3 of Marvel's lineup being located in New York, I get it. It's because everyone who worked there lived in New York. They were just working with what they knew. I get that. That doesn't bother me.
It's when they get into space, but they're still connected, that it's weird.
Well, I like how we lean into the fact that we don't all, live in the same place.
Yeah.
Instead of that being a weakness, because with the internet and all now, we can actually make that a selling point.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
And even having Brittany move, go from, roughly Southern California into just the middle of the Rockies.
yeah.
It's a very different kind of vibe, and I kind of like this idea of putting, making the part of the character with Brittany and her corner of the Mythoverse being a place that's very small and is so tiny and almost inconsequential that you would not assume at first glance that it was really connected to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Whereas,
Although it is. You will find out later.
mm-hmm. But yeah, like what Nebel said, like in a current day Marvel or DC, like the characters could go into space and wouldn't feel like the universe is any larger. Now, that's probably a consequence of them having been around for so long. It feels like they've done everything they possibly could do. But at the same time, you've also got settings like Warhammer 40k, which seem to always either find ways to be dynamic or expand things. Things like that.
Yeah, and you would never assume that a bunch of characters would ever interact. You would never necessarily assume that Caiaphas Cain, hero of the Imperium, might just roll up on Trazen the Infinite, yanking a sweet roll from somebody.
Yeah.
But that's how life is. That's what's cool. Like real life, you and I are canon to Julius Caesar. that's weird, but totally true.
We're never gonna make it.
Now
But,
these
we're
events
in the
don't really
same universe.
overlap, but I mean, like we're in the same canon, and that's how life is. There's things that might have small connections, and one person knows about it, but they're either too far away in space or time, and
Yep.
they don't directly overlap, but there still is influence. And just like I might quote, say, Marcus Aurelius, something in the Mythoverse that can happen, somebody else might know about, but that doesn't mean they were like, bosom buddies with them.
Yeah, or even knew him at all.
Right, exactly. But
Yeah.
you can still have those tie-ins and references and things.
Yeah.
Like the most I think anybody might know about Brittany is a weird true crime story that came out of Southern California. That's it.
And
That's probably about as much as most people would know about her, if even that.
even then, there's always the chance that her identity was censored to protect it.
Almost certainly. Like they knew somebody found it.
I hadn't thought of that. I don't want to go off on a spiel about new Star Trek too much, but I just wanted to say that, like, I hadn't thought of that till y'all said it, but there is something I never liked about in the new series that Seven of Nine has met Picard, because Picard's Borg experience, when they talked about it on Voyager, was like a news story of somebody else. But they had nothing to do with it, and that was kind of cool that their world was so expansive. They talk about the other series as, like, recent events, but no personal connection. They kind of shrunk that universe and messed that up a little bit now that Picard and Seven of Nine actually know each other and are on several adventures together.
Yeah. It kind of it satisfies that, like, I know what that is, dopamine rush, but it also kind of, yeah, like you said, it shrinks the universe a bit and it makes it a little.
Makes it feel smaller.
Yeah.
Particularly when they didn't even explain how they
diminishes
knew.
how
She's
much-
just like, what the hell are you doing here, Picard? And I'm like, wait, she knows Picard? And that's what they put in a trailer. And it's like...
Oh. I know what that is.
Yep.
Anyways, I don't want to veer off into that. It was just something I was saying.
No, that's fine, because, like, this is good, because, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's sort of you could say it's a consequence of it having gone on for so long. I don't really think that's the case, though. I mean, I do think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the whole explanation, because to bring it back to Warhammer, that's a setting that's been around since... I think like mid 80s. Like how far back does 40K go?
I'm thinking about late 80s. I'll look it up.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I know like the first edition. Was like mid or late 80s. And it's like it's been around for a long time. But
1987.
okay, yeah. So this is a setting that's like, if my math is right, it's almost 40 years old, if not just over it.
87? I was born in 87. I am not 40.
Oh.
Okay.
36.
I was a C student in math. All right. It's close to 40. All right. It's close to 40. This is a setting that's close to 40 years old, and
I'm about to use demonetizing words.
this is a setting that is almost close to that is pushing 40, and it still has it still finds ways to innovate on itself. Those they don't always work out, but
Just like me, I'm pushing 40. I still find ways to innovate, but they don't always work out.
they don't always work out. But you know what? At least it's not. Like I said, one thing you can't say about 40K is that it's not something that is stayed static.
Yep.
Like, it's always doing something to shake up the setting. Meanwhile, and as much as I hate belaboring this point, you can have this massive event going on over at Marvel that all the books get swallowed up into when nothing really changes.
Yep. Well, another thing I like about the Mythoverse is having been here from the beginning, just about. And I'm not even talking about as a creator, like, because y'all have been doing the podcast and all along, and the audience has always been kind of like kept up to speed on the development, and it's the being able to like follow things in real time from like the first hint of a concept to coming through as a final work. Like, I remember when Nebel first, I don't know if I want to say pitched it, but was first talking about it, because he had like 2 or 3 ideas. Nebel, you know what I'm talking about. This would have been like 2019, early 20.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right.
The Count of Orange. That one stuck in my mind. And there was a Devil something or other, a place in North Carolina.
Oh, the Devil's Tramping Ground. I was thinking about doing something about that.
And Airwaves was one of the ideas you pitched then, or were like talking about then. And it's like, that's cool to see it go from something that was like on a list to a work that's actually, being finished and put out. Mm-hmm. And like with the Patreon, the audience can follow these processes. That's pretty cool, because like with DC and Marvel, they're either doing the same stuff they've done for 50 to 80 years, or you find out about it when it drops. Or if they do hint at something, it's like Snowflake and Safe Space. It's so abysmal, they don't ever do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we bring the audience along for the ride. That's very unique.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that community aspect is really going to start playing into the industry going forward, or just that ability to interact with your audience and your community in real time. Like, that sort of makes it, that makes you feel like you're part of the process. That kind of gives you a more personal sense of ownership over the thing. And
I just ask you, because like print material is just not going to compete with like video games and stuff like that that's out there. We're up against too high of budgets and effects and everything else, so we need something like entirely different and our own, and that personal touch is the advantage we have. Like a AAA gaming franchise can't do that. They have specific reasons why they have to maintain secrecy and street dates and NDA, and we do too to a certain extent, but we don't have. How many billions is GTA 6 costing?
I'm not like, I lost track.
I know,
but it's like
we can open up our process a little more to the audience and be more interactive, because there's not as much on the line. So we can make the weakness, the lower budget, we can make that our strength.
You can even see that same community aspect in like video games that have been crowdfunded on Kickstarter as well, and just that's what's really great about the crowdfunding model, is just that it adds that personal aspect to the whole process. And as I said already, it just brings a more personal sense of ownership to you as a consumer and or fan, and it feels like it belongs to you more.
And for the audience, there's the like with an independent band, that I saw them first. You can't go back in time and see the Beatles at the Cavern Club in 1963, but you can be on board with an indie comic before it made it big.
Mm-hmm. All right, so okay, well, we've gone a little bit over the time we set, so I think it's time we started wrapping up. Okay, so as before, if you guys want to keep up to date on what's going on with Airwaves and not just Airwaves, anything that's Mythoverse related, best place to do that is on the Mythoverse Patreon. New content updates come every week. It's not always going to be Airwaves, but there will always be something there for you guys to check out.
Yep, and I'm going to be working on setting up some online presence stuff so that I can take advantage of that kind of direct engagement and point you guys over to Mythoverse, point you guys over to Airwaves, and any other projects I start working on, because there's more on the back burner. So if for whatever reason you like what I'm doing, you'll see more of it.
Sounds awesome.
All right. Okay. So yeah, we'll see you guys on next week. Don't know if it'll be Nebel again, but we'll give you something to chew on, hopefully.
I'll show up whether you like it or not.